because of that, they've got a different approach because they've been able to capture that area for a while. So they can plan properly and sensibly around it. Whereas where we are now, we've got issues that we have to address because I can't ask the people to roll their houses up and take them back from the lake. Well, we can, but it'll be very, very expensive for the taxpayer. So this is the issue that we got to start looking at is how do we protect the now and so move forward.
Well, swapping land, like say if you have critical land on Shawnigan Lake that you do not want to be developed, you swap land or buy it off. Like when they were Texada was trying to develop on Mount Maxwell, all of us went to the government, raised what, $5 million, to buy the land off so that it can be protected and the watershed can be protected. So there are ways to do things. If you guys want to save something on Shawnigan Lake, buy it off and save it for the next generation. That's what we did with CRD last year. 3-4 years ago, I started convincing CRD Water Department that, all right, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, if we are going to tap onto some other water source because of population growth, the next water source would be Leech River watershed. And that Leech River watershed is owned by Timber West. And it has been harvested like a moonland. Okay? So now, if we want to use that water now, it will cost us $250 million in terms of treatment. But if we buy it now, let the forest regenerate, and 50 years from now, it will produce pristine water. And that's exactly what CRD did. Bought the land for $58 million. Okay?
Which is more than they should have paid.
The
principle is very
principle,
solid. And what we're doing is the CRD parks contributed to the regional parks function, the Capital Regional District Parks function. They have a levy, what was it, $10? That they build up a war fund, if I can use that term. And we're working to do that sort of activity. And we are getting there. We are looking at somewhere between $5 and $10. The last survey that we had suggested about $7.50. We're not there yet. We've been discussing it. We've got it almost in place, but we're getting there. It's slow, but yeah, we are getting there. So I'm just letting people know this. It's because of the situation that we're in, we find ourselves in. We're not fortunate enough to have people like Jack Hall working for us. He's the CRD waterman. So we have to look at it from a different way to move ourselves into an area where we're more protected. And regrettably, it's as I say, it's just a piecemeal approach, and we've got to try to bring all three agencies into line.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much for coming. It was very informative for me. A couple of questions I have, but before that, a few comments on what Ken said. The controller, the water controller, Peter Becker, very, very supportive of the CBRD taking over responsibility for the Van Lands and the Braithwaites and other systems because they don't want the liability. So it's, as much as it's a positive, there will be a positive outcome, it really is a shuffling of responsibility. And I would argue in the long term, having provincial control over those waters is more in the public interest rather than the CBRD because you're able to disperse the costs over a wider tax base at the provincial level. The advantages of the CRD rather, not just that they have the foresight 100 years ago, but again, they've got a larger tax base, so they can make $58 million investments in the future that we can't do in the Cowichan Valley, and we certainly can't do in electoral area B or C, I should say. So the fiscal challenges are significant, and the only positive counterpoint to that is that public awareness has never been higher. You wouldn't have got 50 people to a meeting on this subject 20 years ago. Particularly if there was the sixth game of Stanley Cup. So the upside is that we're more aware of the challenge, and personal responsibility, which I think is on everybody's mind, is foremost. We can take charge of our own destiny, but we want our governments to ensure that we're protected in terms of health and in terms of quality. The 2 points that really jumped out at me, Dr. Mazumder, were the fact that we treat at the tap, because that's where the liability ends. If we can ensure that the water that's going into the cup or into the teapot is safe, then the government is not going to be accountable for the end result. And that's the tragedy of Walkerton, is that everyone lawyered up at that point. And when everybody lawyers up, that means a transfer of responsibility to the weakest person at the table. And in this instance, it's the CBRD. So as much as in the long term, having local control over your drinking water is the best outcome, the result is that the senior levels of government who have the fiscal capacity to do the innovation and to ensure that the technology is in place so you can update your systems is not there for you. And they're going to pass the buck and say, well, those are really local responsibilities now. So you've got to be very cautious when you hear a senior level of government coming and saying, we're going to delegate authority to you, we're going to give you some seed money to get started, and then we're out of Dodge as quickly as we can go. So that's a big challenge. The interface between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Environment is also one that's dubious at the provincial level. And watersheds all around British Columbia, mostly as a result of logging practices, but also a result of human imprint. The case, and I don't know if you can speak to this, the Powell River example, where they took they declared their watershed a health risk, and therefore they were able to transfer responsibility from the Ministry of Environment to the Ministry of Health. And the Ministry of Health came in and said, well, you've got to, they're immediately responsible to treat, rather than preserve, revitalize, and protect. It was, we'll just put more chemicals in to offset the damage. So those are questions that I would have for you. And the last thing, and I think everyone who's here is already on the myth of abundance, whether it be our capacity to utilize the land that's here, or the notion that this water is inexhaustible. In a rainforest, I can remember swimming in Shawnigan in the 70s when you could see the bottom of the lake.
Yeah.
And I didn't think, and I'm sure that those who have been here for a long time never thought that we would ever see what we saw with the photos of Salt Spring Island. But it's very, very close if we don't manage, or we don't recognize the capacity of the system to manage our input. So the myth of abundance, I think we all get it, or we wouldn't be here this evening, but we need to spread that to a broader audience. And so when you're shopping, when you're having a cup of coffee, for those who aren't here tonight, remind them that we don't have inexhaustible resources, and particularly when it comes to water, even though in November it sure feels like it. Over the long term, it's not sustainable with the populations that we're going to see coming here. We're blessed to live on the greatest place in the world, and it's not a surprise to us that people are coming here in very, very large numbers. And those who have large tracts of land, and I don't want to disparage Timber West, without disparaging Western Forest Products and Island Timberlands as well, you have these forest companies that are liquidating their assets to meet shareholder demands on a quarterly basis rather than managing the land in the interests of the communities, which is what we had done here for a long, long period of time. So we need to put the abundance mythology behind us and recognize that we are in a system that will not sustain a whole lot more than we're giving it already. And good on all of you for coming out here to offer your 2 bits. And as your representative in the legislature, by all means, as Ken said, inundate me with mail and I'll pass it right on to the Minister of Health and the Minister of Environment.
Excuse me, I just have one comment here. And I really didn't want to bring it up after everybody had already spoken, but I've heard so many references to Walkerton this evening. My name is Tammy Chamberlain. I'm the president of the South Shawnigan Neighborhood Ratepayers Association. And I have a lot of concerns when I hear about Walkerton and knowing it had to do with fecal matter in the water and fertilizers and all of the runoff. We're faced with a situation right now where we have, and as much as Dale is my neighbor, we have a really pressing issue where he now has the ability to bring on, 1,000 pig